The first thing you notice about Wainwright is how silence isn't just silence, there it's weight. The snow absorbs everything. No traffic, no chat, no mechanical hums. All you hear is your own breathing, and sometimes even that feels too loud. I'd come here thinking a year-long teaching position at the local high school would give me the peace I'd been craving after a bad divorce. I rented a small cabin just outside town, perched on the edge of a long line of dark spruce trees. From my porch, I could see the entire stretch of snow-packed road leading into the heart of Wainwright, and beyond that, the endless wilderness. There were fewer than 300 people in town, and it showed. One grocery store, one gas station, one bar, one school. That was it. My first week there was uneventful. Days were short, barely 6 hours of daylight, and nights lasted forever. It got cold fast. Inside the cabin, I learned to keep every faucet dripping slightly so the pipes wouldn't freeze, and I kept a stack of firewood by the door. Then, one night, while I was sitting on the porch with a mug of coffee, I noticed movement at the edge of the tree line. At first, I thought it was just an animal, moose, or maybe a fox, but the shape was too tall. Human tall. The figure stood there, half hidden between two spruce trunks, completely still. I stared, waiting for it to move, but it didn't. Just watching. I called out, "Hey, you all right?" My voice cracked from the cold air, but there was no answer. I told myself it was probably someone from town cutting through the woods. But when I finally went inside and peeked out the window a few minutes later, the figure was gone. That night, while lying in bed, I swore I heard faint crunching sounds in the snow outside my cabin. Slow, deliberate steps circling the house. But when I checked the window, there was nothing but unbroken white. By the third week, I was starting to hate how much snow could lie. It recorded everything, but sometimes it made no sense. One morning, I stepped outside with my coffee and stopped dead. Right in front of my porch were footprints. Bare footprints. The kind a person makes without boots, toes clearly outlined, pressed deep into the powder. I knelt down to inspect them, expecting them to lead toward the road, but they didn't. They curved slightly toward the woods and then stopped. No exit trail, no sign of someone walking back. It was as if whoever made them had vanished into thin air. That night, I couldn't sleep. The cabin creaked with the wind, but in between the groans of old wood, I kept hearing soft crunching sounds. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside. The beam swept across the yard, the trees, the untouched snow. Nothing, but I had the sinking sensation I wasn't alone. The next day, I finally talked to my nearest neighbor, an older man named Gus, who lived about half a mile up the road. When I mentioned the footprints, his face drained of color. "You seen him, haven't you?" he asked quietly. "Seen who?" Gus leaned closer. Tall guy, dark parka, just stands there watching from the pines. I nodded slowly, and Gus's expression hardened. "You need to keep your doors locked at night," he said. "That man's not from around here. We don't know where he came from, and he doesn't talk. He just shows up." The way Gus said it made my stomach turn. That night, I pushed my dresser against the front door. The blackout hit during a blizzard. I woke up around a.m. to a strange quiet, the kind of silence that means the heater's dead. The entire cabin was dark, except for the dim glow of my flashlight. My phone had no service, the Wi-Fi was gone, and even the emergency generator sputtered uselessly when I tried to start it. That was when I heard it. Tap. A slow, deliberate knock against the glass of my bedroom window. I froze. The window was on the second floor. I turned off my flashlight and sat completely still, holding my breath. Tap. Another one, louder this time. Finally, I forced myself to look. I crept to the window, pulled back the curtain, and aimed my flashlight outside. Nothing but swirling snow, but when I went downstairs, I found something in the snow just outside my back door, a set of bare footprints, leading from the woods directly up to the house. And next to them, pressed into the glass of the back window, was a single wet handprint. I left before sunrise. The snowstorm had passed, but the air was bitter, sharp enough to make my lungs ache. When I walked out to the truck, I noticed fresh footprints again, the same bare ones, circling the cabin. stopping at each window. I started the engine, trying to ignore the sound of branches creaking in the woods behind me. Then, through the rearview mirror, saw him. He was standing at the edge of the tree line, still, watching. I hit the gas and barreled down the road, but the deeper I drove into town, the worse the feeling got, like something was pressing down on my chest. That was when I saw the second figure, another man, standing just outside the gas station, facing me, completely motionless, and another near the school parking lot, and another by the frozen riverbank. None of them moved. None of them blinked. I don't remember much after that. The last clear memory I have is parking at the edge of the forest and stepping out, drawn forward by something I couldn't explain. The pines swallowed me. I woke up hours later in my cabin, on the floor, with my boots soaked and my truck still gone. The next morning, there were no footprints outside. No sign anyone had been there at all. I haven't told anyone in town what happened, and I don't think I ever will. But sometimes, late at night, I hear tapping on the second floor window again. I arrived in Nome at the start of January, when the days were short and the nights felt endless. The air was sharp and dry, carrying the salt of the Bering Sea. My job was simple. I handled cargo manifests for a small shipping company, and my cabin was a short walk from the office. The first thing you notice about Nome is how isolated it feels. There's one road leading in and out, but during winter it's nearly impossible to drive it. The ocean freezes solid, the air drops below zero, and silence becomes the norm. The locals were polite, but distant. Most were lifelong residents who didn't have much to say to outsiders. On my third week, I was walking home from the office late one evening when I saw them for the first time. 3 bright lights moving far out on the frozen Bering Sea. At first, I thought they were snowmobiles, but the lights glided too smoothly, never bouncing, never swerving. I stood there in the cold for a good 5 minutes, watching. They moved in unison, stopping occasionally before darting to new positions. The next day, I mentioned it casually to a coworker named Lena. Her expression changed instantly. "You saw them, didn't you?" she said quietly, glancing toward the window. "Saw what?" "The lights." When I nodded, she leaned closer and whispered, "Stay inside after midnight. I'm serious. If you see them again, close your curtains." I tried pressing her for more, but she wouldn't say another word. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about the lights, and I wasn't the only one. Around 2 in the morning, I woke up to faint knocking at my door. When I checked the peephole, there was no one there, just deep snow and silence. The house sat alone on a frozen stretch of road, half buried in snow, its roof sagging under the weight of years. What made it stand out was the single red curtain drawn across the front window, the only splash of color in the endless white. Every time I passed it, I felt watched. A week after Lena's warning, I saw the lights again from my bedroom window. 3 glowing orbs hovered over the frozen sea, closer this time, shifting in slow, deliberate patterns. Against my better judgment, I pulled on my coat and went outside. The wind whipped against my face as I trudged through knee-deep snow toward the shore. The lights were moving faster now, weaving around one another like they were searching. Then, just as suddenly, they vanished. On my way back, I found myself standing in front of the house with the red curtain. I didn't plan to knock, but my hand moved on its own. The door creaked open, and an elderly woman appeared, her face lined and pale. She stared at me for a long time before finally speaking. "You shouldn't have watched them twice," she said flatly. I blinked, startled. I don't understand." She pulled me inside, bolted the door, and whispered, "Those lights aren't boats, and they're not machines. They're searching for something or someone. The more you look, the more they notice you. Do you understand?" Before I could answer, she grabbed my wrist hard and hissed, "Whatever you do, don't follow them." I left shaken and confused, but her words stuck in my head. That night, around a.m., I woke up to a low humming sound outside my cabin. The lights were back, and they were closer than ever. I didn't sleep that night. Around 2:17 a.m., the humming returned, louder this time, vibrating the walls of my cabin. Then my TV turned on by itself. Every channel, even the local news feed, was nothing but static. I muted the sound, but the noise didn't stop. I leaned in closer and realized I could hear faint voices beneath the static, fragmented words, like someone whispering directly into the wiring of the house. Then I saw them. The lights were no longer over the sea. They were drifting through town, moving silently down the main road. I killed the TV, turned off every light, and sat perfectly still, but the whispers didn't stop. Suddenly, my phone buzzed. A single text message appeared. "Don't look outside." My heart pounded as I set the phone down and backed away from the window, but curiosity won. I peeled back the curtain slowly and froze. The lights weren't floating anymore. They were hovering, just feet from the ground, and beneath each one stood a figure tall, thin, unmoving. And then, as if sensing me, all three figures turned their heads toward my cabin. By morning, 3 people were missing. No one talked about it. No one even said their names. I packed my bag and drove toward the single road out of Nome, but a wall of snow blocked the highway. The airport was closed, flights grounded for the next week. I was trapped. That night, I kept my curtains shut and lights off, but the humming grew so loud it made my teeth ache. The whole cabin seemed to vibrate. Then came the knocking. Not at the door, on the walls. 3 slow, deliberate knocks, traveling from one side of the cabin to the other, as if something was circling me. Finally, silence. When I dared to peek outside, the lights were waiting at the edge of the frozen shore, brighter than ever, pulsing faintly like they were alive. Something inside me told me to follow. I bundled up and stepped into the cold. The closer I got, the more the air seemed to buzz and hum around me, filling my skull with a pressure that made it hard to breathe. And then I saw what was beneath the lights. Dozens of figures, half buried in snow, standing perfectly still with their faces tilted toward the sky. I ran. By the time I made it back to my cabin, the lights were gone. The next morning, so was the house with the red curtain. When I asked around, everyone told me the same thing. There was never a house there. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear the humming beneath the ice. I first heard about Whittier while browsing job postings online. The ad was for a logistics assistant at a marine shipping hub. What caught my eye was the living arrangement. They offered an apartment inside the same building where nearly everyone in town lived. The Begich Towers, a 14-story slab of concrete built during the Cold War, sitting between the mountains and the sea. A single structure housing nearly the entire population of Whittier, around 200 people. Grocery store, post office, laundromat, school, all packed into one windowless behemoth. When I arrived in late February, the air tasted like salt and metal, and the wind coming off the Prince William Sound carried ice through my clothes. Inside, the tower was warm but claustrophobic. The hallways stretched endlessly, lined with identical beige doors and buzzing fluorescent lights. There were no street sounds, no passing cars, no dogs barking outside. Just a building full of people who hardly ever left it. My apartment was on the 9th floor, directly across from an older woman named Marla, who greeted me the first night with a nod and a single piece of advice: "Don't go wandering after midnight." I laughed it off at the time, assuming she meant there were safety concerns. But then, on my 3rd night, I woke up around 1:30 a.m. to a faint scraping noise coming from the walls. Slow, steady, metallic. I pressed my ear to the drywall. It was coming from deep below me, like something was moving in the foundation of the tower. On Sunday morning, I followed a maintenance worker into the lower levels of the tower, pretending I was just looking for the laundry room. The basement was colder than the upper floors and smelled faintly of mildew and rust. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting pale shadows that stretched down the narrow corridor. That's when I saw it. The door. It was set deep into the far wall, massive, industrial, thick steel with no handle and no hinges visible. Instead, there was an old card reader mounted on the wall beside it, a single red light glowing steadily above the scanner. The faded white stenciling across the top read, "Authorized personnel only." I walked up to it and placed my hand against the cold metal. Nothing. The following afternoon, I casually asked Lena, the clerk at the grocery store, about it. She went completely still, her hand frozen in midair. "You shouldn't be down there," she whispered. "Why? What's behind it?" Her eyes darted toward the security camera in the corner before she leaned in close. "Whatever you do, don't go near that door after dark. Just trust me." When I pressed her for more, she shook her head and walked away without another word. That night, lying in bed, I heard the scraping again. Louder this time, coming from directly below me. By the seventh night, I couldn't take it anymore. Sleep was impossible. Every night, sometime between AM and AM, the noises started. First, the scraping. Then, the low, distant murmurs. Finally, the faintest whispering sound, like dozens of voices layered over one another, just beneath the edge of hearing. I opened the ventilation panel in my apartment and held my ear to it. The whispers grew louder, rising and falling in an unnatural rhythm like chanting. I followed the sound down 9 flights of stairs, into the freezing basement hallway, until I stood once again in front of the steel door. The red light above. The scanner blinked twice, then turned solid. I froze. Slowly, I pressed my ear to the cold metal. The whispers were louder here, impossible to ignore. I could hear distinct syllables now, though the language wasn't one I recognized. Beneath the whispers, there was something else, a deep, throaty sound, almost like breathing. Suddenly, something heavy slammed against the other side of the door. I stumbled backward, heart pounding, and ran upstairs without looking back. Next morning, I asked Marla, my neighbor, if she'd ever heard the noises. She stared at me blankly and said, "If you keep listening, they'll know your name." The snowstorm rolled in fast, swallowing the roads in under an hour. I packed my things, planning to leave at first light, but by nightfall, the town was cut off completely. Around 2:40 a.m., the tower alarms went off, a harsh, mechanical siren echoing through the halls. I grabbed my flashlight and opened my door. Several residents were already standing in the hallway, silent, staring down toward the basement stairwell. Then, the power died. The lights went black, and the siren stopped abruptly, leaving only silence, and the sound of my own breathing. From somewhere far below us came a sound I will never forget. Metal groaning, the unmistakable hiss of hydraulics depressurizing, and then the low, shuddering creak of the steel door swinging open. I backed into my apartment, locked the door, and pressed my ear against it. For nearly a minute, there was silence. Then came the footsteps, heavy, dragging, wet-sounding, growing louder as they climbed the stairs. Someone screamed down the hall, and I heard doors slamming shut. I turned off my flashlight and hid under my bed, forcing myself to stay silent. I don't know how long I stayed there before I heard my apartment door handle slowly turning. It stopped. Silence stretched for what felt like hours. By morning, everything was normal again. The alarms had stopped. The lights were back on, and no one spoke about it. When I asked Marla what happened, she shook her head and whispered, "Don't ask questions. It's safer if you pretend nothing's down there." But last night, the scraping returned. And now, it's coming from the ventilation shaft. I arrived in Kuskokwim Bay in early March, chasing seasonal work processing halibut and cod. The village had fewer than 100 people, a handful of wooden houses huddled together near the shore, battered by salt and wind, and a single dirt road leading inland toward endless tundra. No cell service, no nearby towns. The only way in or out was the ferry, and it only came twice a week if the ice allowed it. At first, I loved it. Days were slow, nights were long, and the silence was total. But it wasn't the kind of silence you get in cities when everyone's asleep. This was heavier, unnatural, like the land itself was holding its breath. By my third night, I noticed something strange. The bay was frozen solid, but near the far shoreline, there was always a patch of dark, unfrozen water, perfectly round, perfectly still. I asked an older fisherman named Tomas about it while we worked. He didn't look up from his knife when he muttered, "Don't go near it." I laughed, thinking he was teasing, but his expression didn't change. "Stay off the shore after dark," he added quietly, "and never answer if you hear someone calling your name." I tried to press him for more, but he just shook his head. That night, I woke up around AM to the faint sound of splashing outside. When I peeked out my window, The dark patch of water was glowing faintly beneath the ice. By the end of my first week, I decided the isolation was too much for me. I told myself I'd leave on the next ferry. The ticket booth was little more than a shack on the dock. The ferryman was an older man with sun-leathered skin and tired blue eyes. When I handed him cash for the ticket, he hesitated. "You from out of town?" he asked. "Yeah, just temporary work," I said. He nodded slowly and leaned closer. "Then listen to me. Stay inside when the tide goes out. Lock your doors. Don't answer if you hear voices." I tried to joke it off, but his expression was deadly serious. "What happens when the tide goes out?" I asked. "The bay wakes up," he whispered, before turning and walking away. That night, I couldn't sleep. Around a.m., a low wind swept through the village, carrying with it a strange, hollow sound like distant voices singing under the ice. Then came the knocking. 3 soft taps on my cabin door. I froze. A moment later, I heard my name whispered my name in my best friend's voice. The problem was, my best friend had died 3 years ago. I didn't move. I didn't make a sound. After a long silence, I heard wet footsteps in the snow, heading toward the bay. The next day, I cornered Tomas at the docks and demanded answers. He stared out toward the bay for a long moment before speaking. "My brother went missing out there in '92, he said quietly. "Same as the others. The water freezes solid, but when the tide pulls back, they say it opens something. And if you look too long, it'll look back." I asked what he meant, but he just walked away. That night, against my better judgment, I went down to the shoreline. The dark patch of open water was wider now, framed by cracked ice and mist. I crouched near the edge, watching. At first, I thought the faint glowing beneath the surface was just refracted moonlight. But then I realized it was moving. Shifting shapes of pale, bluish-white light drifting beneath the ice. I held my breath and leaned closer. Something pressed against the underside of the ice. A hand. Fingers splayed, palm flat, skin pale as bone. I stumbled back, heart hammering. The hand slid away into the darkness below, and then I heard it. My name. Not shouted, not whispered, but spoken clearly, directly beneath my feet. I ran back to my cabin, locked the door, and shoved a dresser against it. That night, I dreamed of cold, wet hands pulling me beneath the ice. The night before the ferry came, I couldn't sleep. Outside, the entire bay glowed faintly beneath the ice, shimmering like a mirror catching firelight. I stepped onto the shoreline, ignoring every warning I'd been given. Shapes moved beneath the surface, dozens, maybe hundreds. Some were human-sized, drifting slowly. Their pale faces turned upward, eyes open but unblinking. Others were larger, longer, twisting and curling into darkness I couldn't comprehend. The voices returned, layered and soft, coming from every direction. Then, without warning, the ice cracked beneath my feet. I fell to my knees as freezing mist billowed upward, and from the center of the dark opening, something began to rise. I don't remember what happened next. When I woke up, I was lying in my cabin bed, clothes soaked, lungs aching. I stumbled outside, disoriented, and saw the docks in ruins. The ferry was gone. Worse, so were the people. Every cabin door stood wide open. Fishing gear abandoned. Fires still smoldering in stoves. The entire village was silent. I was the only one left. That night, I heard the splashing again, closer this time. When I looked toward the bay, I saw dozens of figures standing perfectly still on the ice, facing my cabin, waiting.